أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اتل ما أوحي إليك من الكتاب وأقيموا الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون ولا تجادلوا أهل الكتاب إلا بالتي هي أحسن إلا الذين ظلموا منهم ولا وقولوا آمنا بالذي أنزل إلينا وأنزل إليكم وإلهنا وإلهكم واحد ونحن له مسلمون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, recite what is sent of the book by inspiration to thee and establish regular prayer. For prayer restrains from shameful and evil deeds, and remembrance of Allah is the greatest thing in life, without doubt. And Allah knows the deeds that you do. And do not dispute with the people of the book, except in the best way, unless it be with those of them who do wrong. But say, we believe in the revelation which has come down to us, and in that which came down to you. Our God and your God is one, and it is to him we submit in Islam. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Welcome to another edition of Islam for Europeans. And I never wanted to make this video, but I think it's time. Something has to be said, and our position needs to be clear. I'm not the kind of person to try to backbite or to start a flame war on social media, but I think this has been going on for long enough. So I want to start off this video with a story. Okay, I used to work for a born Muslim who was very active in local mosque leadership. Okay, one day he told me that he wanted to do something to help out the converts to Islam in our local community. So he asked me to call up all the converts that I knew and invite them for iftar at the mosque. It was during Ramadan, right? So. And he genuinely, appreciated the struggle of converts and wanted to know more about why it was so difficult to keep converts in the Muslim community. Okay, so a week later, we're having a conversation about Malcolm X. And I said something along the lines of, after Malcolm came back from Hajj, he rejected the belief that all white people were the devil. And this guy smirked, and under his breath, he said, always. Right? And this is a person who, his entire business relied on, the business from the local non-Muslim community. Right? So why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because this guy was not a liberal Muslim. He prayed very religiously. He wore kufis, and he had very conservative opinions. And, used to listen to a lot of Daniel's lectures and videos. So I'm telling you this because, this story basically encapsulates the paradoxical Daw'ah or right? They want to call it that, Daw'ah of Daniel Haqiqatjou, and many other, not just him, but also some other Muslim quote unquote da'is on social media. They want the West to convert to Islam, right? They genuinely do, but at the same time, a lot of their speech is so incredibly inflammatory and essentializing of even non-Muslims that had nothing to do with colonialism or neoliberal wars or, things like liberalization of the West. So what this speech does is, one, it makes us converts who have given up everything to convert to Islam feel excluded and ridiculed and made us feel marginalized. It enrages our family and our community. So we feel the brunt of it at the dinner table and within when we go see our families. While Muslims like Daniel don't have to face any consequences because they do not interact with the non-Muslim community on a constant basis. And thirdly, it makes Islam and Muslims appear as the internal antagonist of the West, without any nuance. so that our nations that, we as converts are trying to give Dawah to, when they look at us, they see us as complete sellouts and traitors. So, I understand the sincerity, and I know that, he's interviewed many new Muslims before, and he probably sincerely wants us to succeed as Muslims. But I think that, it's taking one step forward and 100 steps back. And I don't think anyone has had the guts to, point out this paradox, until this hour in which I decided to make this video. So I'm sure other people have, made the same comments beforehand, but, it's kind of hard to articulate it sometimes. So first of all, I want to say right off the bat that I don't consider myself a quote unquote liberal Muslim, and in this video, I am not advocating for the style of Dawah that Daniel's detractors advocate vis-a-vis the West, at least in full. I mean, there are some aspects of their type of Dawah, that, are successful and necessary. I mean, they need to give Dawah to their own people as well, and even to the people that they're allied with, right? So I'm not aligning myself with either approach. I think we want to be our own group and have our own approach to give Dawah to the West. But, like I said, we're not liberal Muslims. We try to follow the Quran and the Sunnah as best as we can. But again, a lot of times we don't talk about these contentious issues, that the Muslim skeptic and other da'is bring up, because many of us work for major organizations or we work for universities. And if we were to talk about these things in public, it would put our careers and perhaps our lives in jeopardy. And this brings up another kind of important issue that is not the focus of this video, but when you convert to Islam, you have a very steep learning curve, right? And, many of the people on the quote unquote right, when they expect converts to follow this learning curve to a T, Islam to a T, including wearing hijab for women, it very happens so often that these converts are going to get fired from their jobs. They're going to get kicked out of their homes. They're going to get written out of their wills. And if the same people who say, tough it out and, follow Islam to a T, if their organizations are not going to have a system in place to catch these converts when they fall, which would be financially impossible, then they shouldn't be talking about it, or at least have something in place to, ameliorate the situation of converts. So in essence, you have, one side on more the left progressive end of the spectrum and another side on the far right end of the spectrum when you're talking about these two quote unquote Dawah efforts. And they're sort of what we call caducean, in which, they appear, to want to solve a particular problem from opposite angles. But what they do is end up feeding off of each other, and they end up doing far more harm than good for converts and the families they're trying to give Dawah to, and the Muslim community at large in non-Muslim lands. Secondly, I stated this at the beginning of the video, I'm not creating this video for clout. I'm not creating this video to create a social media war between Daniel and me. We're a small channel, I'm not going to mince words. We have 500 plus subscribers. So we have our own opinions. We're not trying to backbite. We simply do not wish to ally ourselves or be connected with Daniel San's approach. And on the surface, people would think that, that we would ally, with this approach because, we are not the liberal style Muslim. We concentrate on giving Dawah to the West, which is one of our main focuses, but also trying to heal the broken relationship between the two. But as converts, we are the bridges between the non-Muslim and the Muslim world. And we are certain that, these, social media posts and things are basically essentializing the West as irredeemable, blaming all Westerners wholesale for the problems in the Muslim world. Everything from colonialism to neo-colonialism to globalization and things like that, which are terrible. And, we're not, saying that those are good things. Obviously, I mean, this caused nothing but, terror and destruction in the Muslim world. And you can include in that bag anti-Islamic policies in the West, such as the banning of the hijab in France. So we don't agree with any of these things. I think, the issue comes in is that, our approach to solving them is far different, than either the mainstream Muslim approaches. But certainly, using this type of inflammatory language, that's pretty much on the level of Andrew Dice Clay, is like taking one step forward and 100 steps back. I mean, it's incompatible with the work we're trying to do. It's inflammatory, it's tone deaf, and in some cases it could be dangerous for on the ground situations for converts, not just European descendant converts, but any group of converts or Muslim minorities living within a Muslim nation. It can be dangerous to women, the sisters in our community, and really the Muslim community at large. And I don't think that, since they're not constantly interacting with the non-Muslim world on a constant basis like we do, I think our voices need to be heard, and they deserve to be heard. So another caveat is that I'm not presenting this video as a scholar on Islam. I do not have any formal Islamic training aside from several courses and sitting with scholars and things like that. So I'm not a dope when it comes to Islamic knowledge, but at the same time, I'm not a sheikh or anything like that. So, this is not a refutation of Daniel's Islamic viewpoints or his fatwa. However, it's been known in many, Muslim circles high up, many Muslim scholars at the top, that he gets his fatwa from a scholar who has been rejected by, many of the ulama. And that's just a fact. I mean, that's been going on for a while. And I'm not going to say who he is, but I feel that this is important because, even if we're going to be an Islamic organization, we should be following the consensus of the scholars. Especially when, a lot of the things that he's saying is counter, to what we're trying to accomplish as a Muslim organization. Right. So, well, let's get to it. I mean, why are we taking this position so strongly and publicly, basically? So, first of all, and just one more caveat, when I say, Daniel's name, I'm not specifically referring to just him, but again, it's more of a zeitgeist in the Muslim, conservative right than anything else. This just goes for everybody, including ourselves. I mean, sometimes we can post inflammatory things from our group as well, and I might, get angry and say things that are like that. So, I say this first and foremost as a reminder to myself, trying to live best to the ayah in the Quran that, do not argue with the people of the book, except for those who have wronged you, except that, unless it be in the best way. And yes, many non-Muslims have wronged the Muslim community, but you're placing everybody in the same boat. It's just not going to work. So first of all, like Daniel and many of these other heads of some Islamic organizations, they're not, most of them are not converts to Islam, and if they are, sometimes they can kind of be seen as like yes men, not really having their pulse on like the non-Muslim community either, or if they do, and they see something that's, hey, this might be a bit counterproductive if you say this, they don't want to say anything about it. And I'm not going to fault them for not being converts. I mean, people are born into the situations they're born into. I mean, there's nothing you can do about that. But I think Daniel San appears to be someone who's, he touts himself as someone who specializes in giving dawah to the West, specifically Western conservatives. It seems from his recent interviews with Roosh and Joran van Klafferen and things like that. So if you're going to be a leader as someone who doesn't align themselves, with that society, one would at very least have a panel of converts from the region that you're giving dawah to act as consultants, when they can advise you on what is palatable, what their families and communities, what they would find as productive to the dawah, what would be not so productive, and they can also tell you like, hey, what, maybe if you said this, it comes up as a very terrible chess move because you're placing all non-Muslims into the same boat. let me give you an example. Me myself, I'm a white Canadian convert, but if I were to move to Japan and I open up an Islamic Dawah organization there, first of all, I wouldn't make myself the head of that organization personally. I would have a Japanese Muslim run that organization. But if I had to be the head, I would at least have an entire panel of male and female Japanese converts to advise me on the statements that I make, the policies that we advocate for, and any posts we put on social media. Why? Because those people have lived within those cultures their whole lives. Their families are not Muslim. They're Japanese non-Muslims, and everything that we say and do has a direct impact on their lives. So we could post something inflammatory about Japanese culture, or what the Japanese government did, and at the end of the day, I go home to my my house. But Japanese converts, when their families see that, or if those converts say it themselves, it's going to have severe negative consequences. Okay, so I mean, I certainly wouldn't be posting anti-Islamic things that the Japanese people have done in the past or the present, essentializing all Japanese people as xenophobic, or having a big the flag of Japan with a big red X through it as a flag on my profile photo. So and you don't see Christian missionaries do this. I mean, imagine if Christian missionaries went to Tanzania, and in between giving dawah to people in Tanzania to convert to Christianity, they would have as their profile photo a flag of Tanzania with a big red X through it, or making slurs against Africans on their social media posts, so one could say, that's Daniel's son. He's born and raised in the West. He admits that his family, we're not practicing Muslims, but still, really, that's not the same as someone who converts to Islam, who's absolutely immersed in the West. They work for a Western organization, they have non-Muslim families, and they interact with their non-Muslim communities on a constant basis. I know for a fact that if we used any of the, kind of statements that he said in his tweets, this wouldn't last a minute with our families. A lot of us, it would basically ruin any goodwill that we have built up with them. Like when we say the West does this, the West does that, or white people do this, or white people do that, or the kuffar does this, or the kuffar does that. We're expecting non-Muslims, to be able to make the distinction, between the evil people, the people in the government that enact these negative policies toward Muslims, or people who are Islamophobic, and themselves who basically haven't done anything, against, they haven't done anything against Muslims, or actually maybe even support Muslims. So we're expecting non-Muslims to make that distinction. But when the anti-Islam right, when they in turn do the exact same thing, like Muslims did 9/11, or Muslim grooming gangs, right? When the shoe's on the other foot, Muslims get angry, and I'm not advocating that what they're saying is correct. It's really bad to say something that, like Muslims did 9/11. It's not right. It's inflammatory. But again, it's the pot calling the kettle black. And you can say it if you want. I'm not, it's a free country. The West gives you that freedom to say whatever you want. But us as converts, we're the ones who feel the brunt of it the most. And until you've sat down at those dinner tables, having to explain Islam to your non-Muslim family, it's not a sustainable model for us. And I think this really highlights the major disconnect in our approach to the dawah between born Muslims and converts. Their experience with the non-Muslim world has been mostly external. Their interaction with non-Muslims is usually limited to escalated discussions on social media. I'm not essentializing. Yes, there are many Muslims who have non-Muslim family members. There are many Muslims who are married to converts. So I'm not trying to paint everybody with the same brush, but when you don't interact with the Anglosphere or the Hindu sphere on a constant basis, you don't recognize or realize firsthand the consequences of your speech, especially when you are an Islamic organization, really. And really, I mean, Daniel, like many, Muslim da'is in the West, he has no connection to the Western world by blood or by land. He stated very publicly that, if it weren't for his family, he would very gladly move away from the West, and just not live there anymore. He doesn't have any non-Muslim Western relatives, as far as I know. So, I mean, this would be, and again, like it just feels like you just have no connection. Why? How can you give dawah, the people that you're giving dawah to reform their society? How can you do that while at the same time, feel that their whole land and society is completely irredeemable and unsalvageable? Yeah. So, I mean, and again, when you're the head of an Islamic organization, like when you say that the West is irredeemably degenerate, I mean, why would they want to listen to you? Why would they want to try to build up the society from the ground up? I mean, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he lived in Mecca, and the non-Muslims, the pagans, were doing all sorts of crazy things. Like they would gang rape a woman, each having sex with them, and then a spin doctor, or like a witch doctor, would take a stick and go in a circle and then point to a man and say, okay, you're the father of this, whoever is going to be the child. I mean, did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or his companions ever say that their family members or the pagan Meccans were, that their women were whores? I mean, what kind of effect would that have on the dawah there? I mean, secondly, I mean, okay, moving on. Daniel is trying to give us 2 cents on tensions between Muslim minorities and their non-Muslims in the West. So we're getting away from, Europeans and whites. I've seen his posts, his really inflammatory tweets about Breonna Taylor, about Black Lives Matter, which has opinions that are totally against Islam. But even, a lot of conservative Black Muslims have told me that they can't stand Daniel San's approach because he doesn't understand the history and hasn't lived the plight of Black America, right? And he uses the same approach and language that the alt-right uses. And if they were to show his videos to non-Muslim Black people, they would be completely turned off, especially Black women. I mean, when Daniel tweets that the Western women get pumped and dumped, he didn't mention race. So, he could be talking about white Westerners or Black Westerners or Latino Western women. So you're basically essentializing an entire group of people as degenerate, basically any non-Muslims in the West. And you're expecting people to be able to tell the difference. And I can understand why Black non-Muslim women, after reading some of his tweets like that, wouldn't even want to think twice about Islam. Or even if they did convert to Islam, they wouldn't want anything to do, with that particular group. I mean, why would I even want to look into Islam if Muslims are going to, be this self-righteous and, talk like an X-rated comedian? And that brings me to my next point. I mean, Daniel San's anger towards feminism, right? I mean, the gender wars between men and women in the Muslim community, I mean, it's been going on for quite a while. And it itself is also caducean. I mean, you have many Muslim women who have allied themselves with feminists. And you can understand why, because of the abuse towards women in the Muslim world and in the West, and the oppression that they face from non-Muslims vis-a-vis the hijab, being a visible Muslim, and things like that. And it's true that some of these Muslim women are taking opinions that are contrary to the deen. I'm not disputing that. In kind, what has happened is that many Muslim men have taken the opposite, strictly opposite approach, to critique Islamic feminism, from an Islamic, and many times from an Islamic lens. But what, the language, that we're seeing, it just goes way off the deep end, by calling Western women whores. I mean, basically shaming, non-Muslim women in government and media. I mean, like I said, he's also shamed a lot of, non-Muslim women in the government and in media, and regardless of what their opinions on Islam are. I mean, even if they're, totally, like outside of the fold of Orthodox Islam. I mean, a lot of these people are putting their lives and their careers working for either the government or a Western organization. Like everything that they say and do, it has consequences. So, that's the situation that they're in. I mean, like we're supposed to make excuses for our Muslim brothers and sisters. I mean, yes, maybe what they say and what they advocate for is completely against Islam, but again, you don't know what their situations like. They could be forced to make posts like this or tweet something that they don't agree with, and they got to make those decisions. Like it's either I post this about Muslims that's that's true, or non-Muslims that's true, and I get a bullet in the head, or I get kicked out of my post and I can't say anything, or like I can toe the line and do what I need to do. And I've never been in that situation, so I'm not the one to judge in that particular case. So, but what this does basically, this completely destroyed any goodwill between Muslim men and women in many cases. I'm talking about the Islamic feminism and the reaction, which ties into Western chauvinism. I mean, even on my channel, I've never said anything remotely chauvinist on Islam for Europeans. I've kept that issue completely separate, but because there's this belief that if you don't agree with a liberalized Islam, then you must be in the Muslim skeptic camp. I remember reading on my Analytics channel a couple of days ago that all of my viewers are 100% male. So how are we going to exist as a community, just not just Euro Muslims, but any Muslim community, if we're only going to be one gender on one group and then another gender on another group, and all the Muslim men are to the right of Evla, and all the Muslim Muslim women on the left are going to be to the left of Germaine Greer. I mean, you can call me a simp if you want, but if convert men and women can't even marry each other with all these gender wars going on, I mean, how are we going to survive generation to generation, right? So, and it brings me to my final point, and this is just in general to Muslims who are more on the center right, who are trying to give dawah to the Anglosphere. Like most Muslim spokespeople, he does not have his pulse on the neck, or does not know the internal schisms of European nationalism. And I don't expect most Muslims to understand this either. But like I said, Daniel appears as the only Muslim leader who advocates for entering into discourse, with the, European nationalism, the alt-right or the alt-light. What they do not understand is that traditional European nationalism, not that I agree with it in full, but they used to have a neutral or positive relationship with the Muslim world. Okay, so you think of the guys like, David Duke, not that I agree with everything Duke says, obviously, but he himself visited the Muslim world. He visited Syria, he visited Iran, and he had positive comments to say about Islam and Muslims. He even in his book, like he said that Muslims have a very positive image about Jesus and Mary and things like that. So, or Jonathan Bowden is another example. And as a caveat, like I said, I don't agree with everything that Bowden or Duke says, but I'm just pointing this out because this is very important to understand if you're going to give dawah to these particular groups. They understood that, the traditional European nationalists, they understood and to an extent respected Islamic civilization. They supported the Palestinian cause, right? So this is very difficult to understand because they've all been deplatformed. But ultimately, their modus operandi is, the survival of Europeans as a people, right? So, but what happened in the 2000s and in the 2010s is that this traditional group of European nationalists were pushed out by mainstream media, and they were replaced by this pseudo-nationalist, anti-Islam, pro-Zionist, modernist brand of faux nationalism. Okay, so you have these kind of fake alt-right, which are basically alt-light speakers like Milo Yiannopoulos and Gavin McInnes and Tommy Robinson and Geeton Wilders, whose main anger is not the survival of Europeans as a group. Their main goal is to destroy Islam itself, or at least to get it out of Europe. Okay, so these faux nationalists, like I guess faux nationalists, you can call them the alt-right, they will also ally with ex-Muslims in order to convert more Muslims out of Islam, but and also to enrage, Muslims more. And this becomes basically the mainstream discussion, so that it appears that all nationalists have 100% negative opinions toward Islam and Muslims. So the alt-right, these groups were funded by people who wanted to increase the antagonism, basically, between Islam and the West. Right. So basically now you have these two factions of nationalism. Although it appears that they have common interests, they actually internally despise one another. So if you want to think of a parallel example, you have traditional Muslim scholars, leaders like Yasser Qadi, Omar Suleiman, and Tariq Ramadan, who a large chunk of the Muslim community, follows, and takes their opinions from and listen to their lectures. Hamza Yusuf, and even those, maybe a little bit more progressive leaning like Omar and things like that. So that's, those are the traditional leaders, but you don't see those leaders on mainstream media. The only Muslims that you see on mainstream media are either one of two extremes. Either, they're like these extreme Al-Qaeda, Daesh supporters like Anjem Choudhury, or the more liberal extreme of Muslims like Ash Sarkar, right? So the non-Muslims are going to see this, and if they don't interact with Muslims on a daily basis, they're going to think that Muslims belong to either one of these two extremes, and they're not basically going to have their pulse on the Muslim community at large. Okay, you get it? So the reason why I'm explaining this is that almost all Islamic leaders, spokespeople basically, including Daniel, but not just him, do not understand this distinction and this very real schism that exists within European nationalism, right? So it's vis-a-vis, in regards to Daniel, it's either one of two situations. The first explanation is that Daniel knows that this schism exists between the real nationalists and the alt-right, but he doesn't want to say anything about it because it would get him into trouble, which I don't think is true, because he said many, many more things on Muslim Skeptic that if I were to say, I would get deplatformed or I would get fired from my job. The second and the more likely explanation, not just for Daniel, but for other da'is in the same realm, is that Daniel basically has no idea that this schism exists, right? So, when Richard and Keith and Ed, when they did their show on MPI Radix, talking about the virtues of Islam, and he got a lot of hate from, the anti-Islam right, which, definitely does exist, and I'm not going to deny that. A lot of, European nationalists, despise Islam, but when they did their video, I mean, Daniel should have been, on the phone with them right away, or contacted them right away in order to get in touch with them, to have a conversation with them about Islam, But what I guess is the case is that since Daniel did not know about this and did not know that many European conservatives and nationalists do see that that there are things that are redeemable in the Islamic tradition, that just completely slipped under his radar, But the train for that has come and gone. Other Muslims reached out to them, and they put their careers and lives on the line at risk, by having conversations with them. But we still did it, right? It shouldn't be our job. I mean, if you want us to, we shouldn't have to do this, but we saw that there was a gap and it needed to be filled. And since these large Islamic organizations like his own wouldn't fill in that gap, we had to take care of it. But really, I don't think that a conversation between Daniel San and this faction of the nationalists would go anywhere good, really, because it would probably turn into an argument within a couple of minutes over colonialism, IQ, and things like that, and just turn into an absolute disaster of a conversation. Again, I'm not defending colonialism. I'm not an advocate of reductive IQ ideology, myself. I'm just stating the fact that, even though Daniel is against like anti-white racism, which is really appreciated, when it comes to white converts, he's just as angry about the colonial era and neo-colonial wars as his detractors, which in his eyes sometimes justifies the mass immigration of Muslims to Europe. And I know that he said that he does not advocate for that in principle, when he spoke to Rouche. But, sometimes when you read his tweets, like, for example, about how France become a Muslim country in 2030, not many of the people who are immigrating there are not practicing Muslims, and some of them are, I'm not trying to denigrate everybody there. But it appears, at least comes out from his tweet, that, he just wants France to be a Muslim majority country, regardless of how often they pray or what kind of Islam they advocate for, or if they believe in traditional Islam, or if they follow the tenets of Islam, or if they, it doesn't matter, as long as France becomes a Muslim majority country. Even if it says it percentage wise, who cares if they're praying 5 times a day? You may not believe in that, but that's what it comes off at when you read his tweet, the last tweet that we saw. And like in Islam, we believe that nobody can bear the sins of another. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah An-Najm, right? And Europeans living in Europe, most of them never wanted these wars in the Muslim world. They never wanted to support puppet dictators. Most of their families never wanted to move to the Muslim world during colonialism. Most of them weren't even born in the colonial era. And finally, it was the elites among the Europeans that only benefited from colonialism. Europeans living in Europe, I don't think they benefited from it at all. A lot of them were working 60, 70 hours per week, in a coal mine somewhere, as soon as they were able to walk, up until, the early 20th century. It's not like they were eating, peeled grapes skinned by, Muslim slaves. That's the thing, like Daniel San, he claims to be against anti-white racism towards white converts, but he has just as much anger and resentment towards non-Muslim Europeans as the same people that he, that are his detractors. And, if Daniel tried going to an event, with a group of nationalists and started calling their women whores or saying any of the things that he said in his tweets, it's very likely that he's going to get his teeth knocked out. So again, if we present to this group, like to the European nationalism, and again, we're not advocating for their positions, but if we had the opportunity as, European descendant converts, an organization like ours, if we were to simply explain it to them that their anger towards Islam makes it worse for their demographic situation. Because, when Europeans convert to Islam, they face so much anger and resentment and hatred from their families that they get kicked out. And it becomes almost impossible for us to marry another European convert. And it basically leave us no choice to marry into a born Muslim family. I don't blame European converts at all for marrying into a Muslim family because, there's so much antagonism in the Anglosphere toward Islam. So if you explain this paradox to them, that the more they hate on Islam, the worse it is for the demographic situation, you could get them to agree that, European Muslim converts should have their own sub-community. And, you can kind of deal with them very easily. You have a treaty that says, look, you guys are not going to be against the hijab. You're not going to be for advocating for policies that are anti-hijab. You would stop advocating for the voluntary expulsion from Muslim lands. You would stop advocating for the denigration of mosques. And then on our end, Muslims will follow the Sunnah, and that's what we'd advocate for. That very easily could reduce Islamophobia in the West, and then you would get, the survival of European Islam that we're advocating for, right? A very simple approach, But again, like I said, but with the inflammatory speech from not just Daniel, but many other Muslim figureheads, when they post this really angry stuff towards the alt-right that just serve as basically free advertising for the anti-Islam right. Groups are going to use that and just use it to gather more recruits. The last tweet that he sent about the Eiffel Mosque, you could just tell Génération Identitaire and Patriotic Alternative and Golden Dawn are just going to put that up as a giant poster, and they're going to get thousands of followers to join their groups. So bravo, So there you have it. That's my message. So Daniel, if you're watching this, nothing personal, buddy. I mean, we both want Islam to succeed in the West. I just think that we have completely different visions. And if you want to take my advice, first of all, just put down the Twitter. I mean, you're saying things that are just making it exponentially difficult for its converts to survive in the West. You're making it inflaming the situation for Muslims on the ground, converts and born Muslims. If you don't think the West is salvageable and you want to move to a Muslim country, I mean, by all means, be my guest. We're not going to stop you. But if you can't do that while at the same time trying to give dawah to the West at the same time. If you really want to see Islam succeed in the West, let us converts and the African American Muslim community in the West who've been they're here for generations. Let us do the dirty work. Let us do the work on the ground. Because basically all these essentialized angry tweets towards all the West is going to make it exponentially more difficult for us, to not get kicked out or disowned. It blames all Europeans and all Westerners for the terrible things that their governments have done towards their country. And if your response is, so what? So what if you get kicked out of your house? Again, have Muslim skeptic pay room and board for these converts who get kicked out and fired from their jobs, when they can't follow, Islamic edicts to a T from day one. If you want to see Europeans embrace Islam en masse, advocate that they collectivize, that they create their own organizations, their own fuqaha, their own restaurants, their own butcher shops, their own dawah groups, their own marriage networks, just as other Muslim subcultures have already done. They would drop the haram things in their culture and just keep the good things in their culture, And by doing that, you'll break the cycle. And European nationalists who want to see want to see basically Europeans survive, will look at that and go, okay, yes, the Muslims, they have something to offer. We're ready to deal with them. We'll stop advocating for anti-hijab laws and anti-mosque laws and things like that. Islam will be seen basically as a universal cultural filter, as opposed to a foreign invader, which, looking at your last tweet with the Eiffel Mosque, you seem to have no problem with. So that's my time for today. Like I said, I'm not making this video as a flame war. I'm not doing this for clout. I'm not doing this for more viewers. But again, if you want to subscribe, more than welcome to. My name is Robert from Islam for Europeans. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.